At the start of this season, if you were asked who would win the Constructors Championship, you would have had to be crazy to say anyone other than Red Bull. And now, they're barely even in the fight for second place. Let's talk about that. Welcome to Fiends, where the F1 never ends, just like this season. 2024 has been the longest Formula One season ever. And while it has been exhausting, it has shown one of the benefits of a long, drawn-out season. It gives other teams a chance to catch up to the frontrunners. Just 5 races into this season, I made a video about how Formula One was so repetitive that YouTube demonetized my channel for repetitive content. True story, this actually happened. I planned to release it after the next dominant Verstappen victory, but that never came. Sure, Max did win some since then, but they were hard-fought battles that he won by the skin of his teeth. Hardly dominant. As McLaren continued to improve and the boys in Papaya became regulars on the podium, I realized this season was anything but repetitive. Max had a big lead but was slowly losing it, and a season that started off looking like it was going to be more of the same quickly became the most exciting season since the regulations changed. But there was something else I failed to notice. While we were all caught up in the battle between Red Bull and McLaren, Ferrari had been quietly performing with incredible consistency. They have been on the podium in 14 of the 20 races we've had so far this season. And now that they've taken another step forward in terms of performance, they've not only put themselves in contention for first place in the Constructors Championship, they've basically removed Red Bull from the conversation when it comes to second place. I made a very controversial video earlier in the season when I said I'm grateful for Checo's underperformance. And this is precisely why. Perez is a solid 8th place with 150 points to Max's 362. If we take Bottas as the benchmark for a solid second driver, averaging 60% of his goated teammates' points, then Perez should be at 217, and those 67 points would make all the difference. I don't lay the blame solely at Perez's feet. A 13-point lead in the Constructors with 4 races to go is by no means a foregone conclusion, but it would have kept them in the fight. It's clear their car is no longer the fastest on the grid, especially after all of those rules clarifications seem to have nerfed them. But as it currently stands, they need to find some performance out of nowhere if they want to claw their way back into the lead, or even second. Ferrari coming from behind to take the fight to McLaren this late in the season has to be one of the most exciting upsets since 2007 when Ferrari came from behind to take the fight to McLaren late in the season. But this time, instead of Ferrari scooping up points while the McLaren drivers fight each other, they're scooping up points while Max forces Lando off the road. Now, call me crazy, but in the last few races, I have seen a lot of parallels between Max's recent actions and the way Michael Schumacher was acting near the end of his 1997 campaign. You know, the one where he tried to win by crashing his rival out? Is nobody in Max's camp willing to tell him how that turned out for Schumi? I know the stewards finally got on top of this in Mexico, but they should have shut this down a lot earlier. Lando made it quite clear in the press conference after Mexico that he's just trying not to crash right now, because Max would obviously benefit from that, given his massive lead. There is no question that Max has been driving dangerously recently, and it stinks of desperation. But every time he slams the door on Lando, he opens the door for Ferrari to just waltz right through. And that's what they've been doing. Look at turn 1 in Austin. That dive bomb handed the race to Charles. It was the same in Mexico when Max ran Lando off the road, opening the door for a Ferrari to just slip right through. Following Mexico, Ferrari is now 29 points behind McLaren and 25 ahead of Red Bull. Another 1-2 victory for them wouldn't be enough to overtake McLaren unless the Papaya boys had an unusually bad race, but they're coming off a 1-2 followed by a 1-3. So it seems very possible that they could put up a few more very good results before the end of the season and clinch the championship. But even if Ferrari wins in 2024, that only makes Red Bull stronger in the long run. If Red Bull finishes in 3rd this season, which I expect they will, then their aerodynamic testing time jumps from 70% to 80%, which could be crucial in a year when they're preparing for new aerodynamic regulations. This could make all the difference in 2026. assuming Red Bull hasn't been crippled by the loss of all the key figures who've left their team this year. But Red Bull isn't the only team losing a major contributor. Ferrari is dropping Carlos Sainz at the top of his game in exchange for a 40-year-old Lewis Hamilton. Now, I'm not saying Lewis is washed, but we don't know how he's going to fare at Ferrari after a 10-year stint with a team that was built around him. Not to mention, he's spent his entire career driving with Mercedes engines. There's a lot that's going to be up in the air after this season, and that's great. But I still have one major concern. I don't know about you, but I've been finding myself burning out of Formula One a little bit recently. I still enjoy it, but there are just too many races. I should be more excited than ever about the title fight, but instead, I find myself wishing it would just conclude. Austin showed us why we don't need Miami or Las Vegas. Circuit of the Americas is a world-class track that provides phenomenal racing. These cars were meant for purpose-built race tracks, and street circuits just feel like filler at this point. And filler is the one thing we don't need anymore. I would love to see F1 cut the calendar down and just focus on better racing. If you're going to add something to the calendar, it needs to bring a unique aspect to the racing, like the thin air in Mexico or the curbs in Montreal. Instead of dumping $10 billion into purchasing property in Las Vegas just so you can get some picturesque photos of F1 cars racing down the Las Vegas Strip, they could have spent far less money and purchased property just outside of Las Vegas and built a world-class facility. There's plenty of space. The only reason I can think of as to why they didn't do that is because of corporate execs who get off on the idea of picturesque photos of F1 cars driving down the Las Vegas Strip. But frankly, I couldn't care less about cool photos. What I want is more of what we got in Texas and Mexico, and less of what we got in Miami and Monaco. I should be excited by the end of the season, especially when both championships are in contention and there's the possibility for the third place team to come from behind and upset for the victory. They need to leave us wanting more. But instead, I feel like I've got my fill, and I just want some time to digest. But if you need more F1 content to digest, why don't you check out my review of the Daniel Ricciardo romance novels? Christmas is coming up. Maybe you'll want to order some great gifts for mom,